Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in this week. I have an absolutely amazing podcast for you and a great guest, obviously. But before I introduce him, as always, please follow, subscribe, rate, review the show. It helps boost the podcast, grow the audience, and ultimately helps me to get the best possible guests out there, thus creating the best possible show we can. And that's all with the help from you guys. So please do that. Additionally, go follow me on Instagram or Twitter. Instagram is ROYBTZ. Twitter is ROY_BNTZ. There you can subscribe to the newsletter, which gives you access to updates, occasional blog posts, news about the guest and future of the show. And most importantly, it's just an easy way to get the podcast into your inbox every Tuesday. All right, one more thing. Please consider supporting this independent podcast. I personally hate when there's ads in the middle of the podcast that I listen to. I actually don't even like it when they're in the beginning. It just takes away from what I want to listen to, and I'm not interested in listening to 5 to 8 minutes of different ads, even though some are great. But just personally, I want to be independent, and I need your support. So please, there's a link in the show notes. Feel free to go support this podcast if you like it. It helps keep it independent and ad-free. Last thing, if you want to build your own podcast, I have a full tutorial, A to Z, everything you need to know packed into one ebook. It's how it'll help you to grow, start, execute, market, reach out to guests, even just understand on the basic level why you need a podcast, what is it good for, how it can help you in other areas of your life. So just really everything you need to know when it comes to podcasting, all my experience in one great, easy to use, easy to read, easy to execute on ebook. So check it out. All right, let's move on to the guests. This week, I have Ryder Carroll. Ryder is a New York Times bestselling author, digital product designer, and the inventor of the bullet journal method. Personally, for me, this podcast was very eye-opening because I felt like a lot of Ryder's life was a mirror to the things I've experienced, where if it's being bad in school or not being able to fully understand what the teacher wants, or having a different way of looking at things, but people telling me I'm wrong in my views, but that's just how my brain processed things. At the time, I just thought I was stupid or I just didn't understand. And I'm sure that's something a lot of kids go through. Ryder went through something similar. So it's always great to meet someone that had a similar experience to yours and to see how they adjusted to it, how they overcame it. And the way Ryder did was essentially starting the bullet journal. This is, again, not some overnight thing. This is something that took, I'm sure, years and years of trials and error and eventually figuring out what works and what doesn't. But he eventually came up with the bullet journal. And it's something that he describes as mindfulness practice disguised as a productivity system. It's designed to help you organize your what while you remain mindful of your why. All right, so a lot to unpack on this episode. Let's jump right into it. Let me introduce this week's guest, Ryder Carroll. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
How you doing, Ryder? Thanks for being on the podcast.
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm very interested because we share a common thing, which is ADD. I'm sure many others do now. When I was growing up, at least, it wasn't something that was really known, talked about, or I don't know, just wasn't something that was in the school system at the time. So I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to have this discussion, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Same, me too.
All right. So for people who may not know you, can you give us a little bit of background?
Sure. My name is Ryder Carroll. I'm probably best known for creating the bullet journal method, which is a mindfulness practice that's disguised as a productivity system. All right. Basically, it's a way for you to organize your thoughts using nothing more than pen and paper. That's the short version.
We have time, man. You can get into it. All right. So I'll kind of pull it out of you slowly. It's funny. I've been, and I've only realized this through, researching you and looking at the videos. I've been bullet journaling my whole life, essentially, not the whole system, right? But just
Sure.
like putting things into a bullet type system. And only when I saw the videos and I started hearing you and how you describe everything, I was like, it clicked for me. I was like, oh, I've been doing this my whole life. Like, that's the only way I can make sense of things. Like when I put it into bullets. Otherwise, it's just one big mess in my brain.
Yeah, I found it incredibly important for me to externalize my thinking on paper. And yeah, I find that many people with ADD have the same experience when they start writing things down. And there are less and less of those people because everybody's using apps these days, which are fine. And we can get into that as well. But there's a certain kind of magic when you put pen to paper.
So let's talk a little bit more about you. I want to get to know you a little bit better. Where were you born?
I was born in Vienna, Austria.
Oh, wow. Okay. And at what age did you move here?
When I was 18. My parents were both American, so I'm a kid of expats, if you will.
Because you have zero accent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're both American. So I grew up in an English-speaking household abroad. And let's say whatever accent I did have disappeared really quickly when I moved to the States.
What was it like living in we're in Austria, in Vienna?
In Vienna. Yeah, it was kind of magical, to be honest. Vienna is an incredibly safe city.
Mm-hmm.
And I also grew up in an international school system where we had I think at least 50 different nationalities represented. So I was able to grow up in a very diverse environment. And it was always really interesting to be able to see so many different perspectives juxtaposed to what we were learning about or social interactions or something like that. It was, the older I get, the more I realize how lucky I was for having been born and raised in that environment. Both of my parents were teachers as well. So at that school, that's how I was able to go. So it was a really interesting childhood. I didn't realize that at that time, but looking back on it, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I keep drawing more and more parallels to your life. I grew up in Africa and originally from Israel, but I was kind of moved around, and I went to different schools and got all the different perspectives and really diverse school people from essentially everywhere in the world. And at the time, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I wanted to go back to my friends. I was bad in school, so I just generally hated school. But being in a foreign country, away from your friends and your family. But now I really see it as I guess you could say as a gift. I learned English. I got a perspective that I never would have gotten otherwise. I have a love for travel that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise. So there's so many benefits, but at the time, it's just impossible to see.
Sure. You have a very limited perspective as a child. It's when options start getting removed and flexibility starts getting removed by becoming an adult, where you start seeing more clearly what was available.
Mm-hmm. Did they have trouble pronouncing your name in Austria?
Yes and no. It's pronounced differently in German, but also at the time there was a candy bar that had the same name. It was just actually American candy bar, but it had it was pronounced Ryder in German, and for kids that was endlessly amusing. For me, not so much.
How would they pronounce it?
Ryder.
How?
Ryder.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially the same, but just with an accent.
Yeah. In German, you put the R's in the back of your throat. So that was a thing. And there was, the candy bar, which was pronounced Weida. It's actually Twix in English.
Twix. Nice.
So anyway, I had to live through that, which isn't the worst thing.
Yeah, I completely changed my name because the original is Roi. Mm-hmm. But no one could pronounce it, and no one could even write it. It would be like ROYI, ROYEE, ROE. It just all these different. I was just like, you know what? just do Roy. We'll stick with Roy. Roy's easy. Everyone gets it. 3 letters, done. stick with that since then.
It's efficient.
Yeah. And I guess at what point did you figure out that you're having trouble in school and maybe, you're wired a little bit different than the rest of the kids? And at what point did that float?
So as I mentioned, I went to an international school system, but I think one thing that's a little bit different about that, and that's important for what we're going to talk about, is that it was K through 12, essentially. So I knew many of the kids that I graduated with from kindergarten to senior year.
Wow.
And so that also gives you the ability to have a contextual awareness of skill that you might not have otherwise, right? When you meet somebody when you're 12 or 15 or 16 years old, a lot has happened up to that point. Yeah. But with these kids, I mean, we started with nap time and then graduated with physics. Well, who am I kidding? I wasn't in the physics class, but you know what I mean? It's very quickly our ability or our skill levels started to differentiate us, and things that were really easy for my peers as we went, the first grade, second grade, became harder and harder and harder for me. And you're not the only one who notices that. They notice it as well. And that starts drawing lines in the sand between people who can do things and people who struggle to do things. So it becomes kind of like a social stigma as well when I guess you're slowing down and they're speeding up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was slowing down a lot faster than my peers, let's put it that way. So it became evident that something was different.
What were some maybe things that you found more difficult that you found that your peers were just breezing through?
I think a lot of it started with math, to be honest. I just didn't understand it. And another thing that became clear to me is I had a really hard time paying attention. Yeah. I was always in trouble. I was always in trouble for drawing on something or talking to somebody. For me, my attention was very strongly drawn to the shiniest thing, whatever was the most engaging, in a way that didn't seem to be a problem for other people in a real way. And that happened over and over and over again, to the point where I became the problem child. It was that extreme.
Because at the time, I'm assuming this is about 15, 20 years ago, something like that?
Sure. Let's say that.
Because at least for me, no one, and this is, you're essentially kind of telling also my story in a version. I'm sure you're probably voicing other people's version of what they went through as well. Excuse me. Did teachers know? Because there wasn't a lot of knowledge of this at the time. Were they aware that this is happening, or they're like, oh, let's just label this kid a troublemaker and that's that?
Well, ADD wasn't a thing where I grew up, right? Even though it was an international school, it was even less well known in the States. And the States at the time was rather a rare diagnosis. So no, I think the closest thing that people had were dyslexic, or they're hyperactive. There was nothing like that. And if anything, teachers certainly noticed that something was wrong. They had no real theory as to what. Is this he's dumb or incapable or whatever? And of all people, my German teacher was the first one to actually detect that there was a pattern in what I wasn't able to do, or something that I wouldn't be able to understand. And she thought it was dyslexia, which it wasn't. But she was the first time where she was able to talk to my parents, who were also teachers, in their language, mm-hmm. right? Because teachers do have an awareness if some kid keeps having problems over and over again. And I think that's also a really important part of the story. It's yes, there's learning disabilities, but there's also teaching disabilities, So
sure.
I definitely had teachers who were this is his problem, not my problem. And, that's a whole different debate, if you will. But there were definitely teachers who realized that there was potential and that there was also something potentially wrong at the same time. And then eventually through a battery of different tests and diagnoses when I was back in the States to visit my grandparents. I was diagnosed with ADD.
Were the things that you were maybe exceptional or really good at? Because everything's balanced, right? If one thing is a little off, it enhances something else. For me, just as a quick example, I mean, I remember when I was in high school, horrible student, just horrific student, ditching school all the time. And I actually really thought I was pretty dumb at the time. And kids around me were doing pretty well in school. And I remember that in math specifically, I would be able to get the answer, but I would never be able to show the way. And I would get an F for that because I was never, the teacher thought I was either making it up or like I copied it, but I wasn't able to show her the whole way how I got to it. But in my head, I was able to make, this plus this plus this, or whatever it is. And I would get to the answer and I would get it right many times, but I would still flunk, right? Because she didn't believe me. So like, is there something to that effect that, maybe you're really good at and teachers just wouldn't pick up on?
I think that I did very well with all courses that were artistic or creative, or when I was allowed to use my creativity. Like once in one of my history courses, we had a big project that was based on designing your own planet, essentially, with different cultures on it and how those cultures interacted and what kind of government they would have and stuff like that. And I was terrible in history because I couldn't remember anything. But when I came to that project, there was no other project like it. I mean, I designed the banners for the different cultures and like everybody had names and there were tons of illustrations and really deep detail and these it was very Game of Thrones-y in that sense. And it was just something the teacher was delighted by. But when I wasn't able to apply my creativity, or when I was in a class that may have seemed creative, but didn't allow me to do that, like poetry, for example, was a course that I didn't do well in, I would shine. I would definitely do better than other people. Like creative things just seemed easy to me, drawing, writing, those kind of things that came easily. But I think when you're first starting real school, real classes, a lot of the creativity wasn't there. It's like math, handwriting, grammar.
Can you describe for people, I guess, what it's like to be inside the mind of someone with ADD? The way I can kind of describe it, you're going to do obviously a much better job, but it's kind of like, for me, there's no in between. It's either like, whatever I do, I can't get interested in this task and I will postpone it and procrastinate on it for the end of time, or I'm just utterly obsessed with it. And I can sit and either, binge watch something or sit on the computer and do this task forever. Cause I for some reason, my mind gets really engaged into it. But is there maybe a different version or a way to explain it better?
Sure. What you said resonates with me as well. The way that I try to describe it to people who don't experience is like having ADD is like trying to catch the rain, right? It's just like constant shower of information and you don't really know what to hold on to. Is it this piece of data? Is it this piece of data? The amount of data just never ends. Like a lot of people with ADD are said to be very sensitive to stimuli. So it's easy for us to be distracted because we're aware of too many things at the same time.
Yeah.
And I find that to be true. It's like, there's no way to catch the rain. There's so much happening at any moment. And that's kind of wonderful too, because it's kind of hard to be bored as well. It's like you're sitting in a room. There's the light, the temperature, the floor, the smell, the this, the that, like it never ends, right? And so that I would say is kind of the blessing and the curse, because every once in a while you attach to something and you can be completely transported. For me, it's kind of like lightning strike, if you will. You're standing in this rain and once in a while, like there's this lightning strike and you're transported into something where I guess the best word for it is flow, where you just flow with something. And maybe that's a book that you're reading or a conversation that you're having, but time just disappears. And then all of a sudden you're back. That's the best way I can describe it. So from the research I've done, people with ADHD also have the ability they have hyper attention as well.
Okay.
So they're on both sides of the spectrum. It's hard for them to pay attention to something, but when they do pay attention to something, that they can completely lose track of time and pay attention to something for days on end.
Yeah.
And I found that to be true for sure. And I found that not to be the case with other people that I know. They can pay attention to an hour or something, but if I'm into a show, I can watch the whole thing. If I'm into a book, I'll read the whole thing. If I'm coding something or working on something, people have to drag me away from the thing that I'm doing. So yeah, it's either or.
It's funny you say that, because when I watch a Netflix show or a documentary, my wife, she'll be on her phone and watching this thing, usually, unless it's like she's super, super into it. But in that case, she won't be. But for me, like if I'm not 100%, like all my attention's into this thing and I get annoyed, I'm like, why are you on your phone? Like, why aren't you? And she's like, no, it's okay. I can do both. I'm like, no, it's impossible. Like you have to stay focused on this thing. And like my brain just can't comprehend, because if I'm on my phone, I'm not 100% not watching. I'm on my phone, and then vice versa. If I'm watching, I'm 100%. I can't be on like two tasks can't coexist at the same time. And for her, it's like, no, this is not a problem. I can easily do this.
I found that to be true too. I mean, for me, I don't believe that multitasking is real. From what I've read, it seems that there's a very, very, very small percent of the population that can actually multitask. Most people are just kind of fracturing and shattering their attention across too many different things, which I'm a master at, right? It's just like when you have ADD, I'm paying attention to everything. And I feel like all the work that I've done has helped me become better at monotasking and being present with one thing at a time. That's really what a lot of this work is helping me to accomplish.
So at what point because I'm assuming this is what happened to me, I'm assuming something somewhat happened to you, you're labeled a problem child, and then you probably get sent to some counselors and they start asking questions and they're trying to, figure out what's happening. And for me, no one gave me good advice. They try to put me on all the different drugs, which I want to get to in a few minutes.
Sure.
I think back home it was Ritalin or Concerta, one of those. But no one really gave me good advice, and I'm interested if you did get good advice, or did you just at some point, develop the method that we're talking about, the bullet journal, just kind of by yourself independently?
Well, at some point I realized that my mind worked differently than other people's, and not in a good way, right? Whatever was different was not helping me to get ahead, quite the opposite. And I noticed that when I would doodle in my paper notebook, I was much more able to pay attention. Of course, when your teacher sees you doodling, though, then you get into trouble and you get sent to the principal. And I was like, I'm paying attention. I was like, sure you are, So I had to start getting in this habit of actually pretending to listen. And then when they wouldn't look, I would start drawing so I could actually pay attention to what they were saying. The drawing occupied the part of my mind that needed distraction at the time. And when I could, just through drawing, all of a sudden the information went in. And one of my teachers noticed that. And she pulled me aside. She's like, I noticed that every time you're drawing, you're listening. And every time you're looking at me, you're not. So good for you for figuring that out.
Wow.
And it all of a sudden dawned on me that it was the first time that an adult gave me permission to solve my own problems, which is something that hadn't really been available, right? It was always do what they say. When you're young, you're always looking at the tall folks for answers, your siblings, your parents, your teachers. It doesn't really occur to you, at least it didn't to me, that I could design my own solution. And I realized in that moment that not only that I could, but that I would have to, because people didn't understand what was going on. And that's kind of something that changed my entire perspective. Like I think Seth Godin puts it well, there is no lifeboat coming. you have to design your own solutions to your own problems as best you can. Sure, learn from others, be inspired by others, but ultimately it's your responsibility. And I took that to heart and I started trying to find solutions to my own challenges. And at that time, it was trying to pay more attention and get ahead in school, or at least not fall behind as much as I did. And I tried all these different ways of organizing my notes and taking notes and putting them together. And most of it didn't work. But every once in a while, something did. And then something else would. And then something else would. And then over time, I started to develop this system, which eventually turned into a methodology of different tools that worked together and supported each other. And all of a sudden became force multipliers in my productivity. And I didn't have a name for it until I eventually shared it.
Could you explain in a little bit more detail what bullet journaling actually is and actually does?
Sure, I will try to do it. For those who are listening, I suggest going to bulletjournal.com because it's a very visual methodology. You don't need to be an artist or anything, but you have to see it. But the short version is that you are capturing your thoughts throughout the day, and through various different techniques that I teach, you filter those thoughts through a series of different questions. So you're basically curating your thoughts over time. You're not trying to keep endless to-do lists. You're trying to focus on what matters. Like, bullet journaling is not just about organizing what you're doing. The real emphasis is figuring out and staying mindful of why you're doing what you're doing. And the whole methodology is set up for you to keep on checking in with the things that you're writing down to learn from your experience, and in regular daily, weekly, and monthly intervals.
Have you ever been, I guess, I don't know, has anyone ever reached out to you from any kind of body of science, of psychology, of something, to say like, hey, can we actually introduce this into schools, or can we introduce this method into whatever, higher learning or where, educational institutions? Because, and so I guess it's actually, there's two questions here, but like, I remember for me, they're like, oh, you should take this Ritalin or Concerta or Adderall, whatever the fuck it was. And I didn't like it at all. It made me, it's like taking cocaine. It's like taking an actual drug. It's not like this little thing. And you have this down afterwards where you're just like groggy and like moody, at least for me. And I was like, this isn't for me. I'd rather be my regular self that's like, ooh, look, bird. Ooh, look, like just anything can just take me out of my concentration when I was in class than feeling that feeling. But that's kind of standard. Like, that's just what they prescribe, I'm guessing still to this day. So it's just, I'm interested to see if anyone's ever reached out to you to say like, hey, instead of, putting these drugs and giving these drugs to kids, like maybe we can use this method to put into different, educational institutions across the country.
People have definitely reached out. What I can say is that many in our community are in higher education, whether they're getting their PhDs or they're teaching others, helping others get their PhDs. A lot of graduate students, a lot of teachers and faculties, professors use bullet journaling. And that's what's so cool about this thing. When I shared it with people, I focused very much on the productivity and organizational aspect. And it never occurred to me how this could map onto other people's lives. And I think the most exciting thing is that I built this flexibility in because of the way that I thought, right? I think in images, long form, short form, all over the place. I have an ADHD brain, so I designed a system around that. Yeah. And that flexibility allowed the methodology to map onto all these different lives that I could have never imagined possible until this day. Basically, I spend most of my time trying to highlight alternative uses for this, for parents, for teachers, for students, for people who are dealing with end-of-life treatment for those that they love, or giving birth. Like, the applications are just endless, and I keep learning from the community. And yes, some institutions have definitely built bullet journal classes into their curriculum to provide additional resources for students on various levels of education.
That's awesome. No?
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Something of yours is kind of used like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just where it's being applied is just infinitely interesting, from church groups to the military to artist groups to it's agnostic as to the group. And that's wonderful. It's all knowledge management. And that's really exciting to me.
So what are if you have maybe, I don't know, if you're pro, against, ambivalent about, Ritalin and Concerta? Because I do know people that say that it does work for them. Just again, I can only speak from firsthand experience. I did not like it at all.
Yeah, I think the medication conversation is very nuanced, and I don't want to throw a general net there, but I feel like if medications are used as tools, then I think that's fine. It's like you're not going to give somebody a problem for wearing glasses or having braces or something like that. And I see medication the same way. Some of us are born with more and less of something. And I do think that there's also a problem with overprescription as well. Sure. I think both of these things are true. And I've been on both sides of that, right? I definitely benefited from prescription as well as suffered its consequences at the same time. I actually stopped taking Ritalin because people started breaking into my room at college and like going through my stuff to steal it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't adding enough value at that point to continue taking it, which was really kind of an interesting experience because I stopped taking it because, well, I didn't want people breaking into my room anymore. And like pointing fingers at people who live with you, that's always an ugly thing. And all of a sudden I realized that this thing that I had been doing supported me. It was really interesting. I was like, oh, wait, okay. So yeah, the short answer is I think it can be very effective, and it's not a simple solution. It shouldn't be taken for granted. It should not be taken lightly at all.
Yeah. I know too many people that started a little side hustle of Ritalin throughout school just to make a little extra money. And I don't know. I think the problem with prescription and drugs generally, and this is why your method is just, 100x better, is just the dependency. It's just, if you need this thing to, and it's not necessarily even this, it's literally anything. If you need to take these drugs, the problem is, and again, this is for anything and everything, is eventually you're going to need to take more of those drugs because it's not going to be as effective. And then you just create a dependency and, vicious cycle that just never ends. So if you have alternative ways specifically for this, for learning and for being in attention through these different, I don't know if it's meditation or bullet journaling, or whatever works for you, that's just such a better alternative.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's also this other part of being on medication where you feel that like there's the physical dependency, but there's also the emotional dependency. It's like, if I go off this, I'm going to be a lesser person, or I'm going to be disabled, or whatever it is, or you're ashamed of being on it in the first place. And I think it's really important to always be figuring out ways to align with your values constantly, and if the medication helps you do that, fine. And if it doesn't, then that's also important, because we change over time, right? And that's another thing. Our brains change, our brain chemistry changes, and our circumstances change. Mm-hmm. To be less vague, I just realized this was a very vague tangent, but I realized that in college, it was much easier for me to pay attention because I had the options of spending my time doing things that really interested me. Mm. Right. And that wasn't available in previous curriculum. I had to suffer through all these courses that till this day added zero value to me, I think. Right. And the more freedom that you get with the choices that you can make, I think the more you can start to embody things that may have been really unnatural to who you were at an earlier age. Right. I'm not a numbers person. I'm not. And sitting through endless math classes didn't help. It made me feel bad about myself, but all of a sudden you let me do what I want to do. Oh, interesting. I don't really need the Ritalin anymore because I can actually hyper focus on things that I feel engaged by. And if anything, I feel like my experience also made me realize how important it is to take responsibility for the choices that you're making with your life over and over again, and not to take them lightly, and to try to align with with what you've learned about yourself. It's like, I don't want to put myself into positions where I'll fail, or things that I really don't want to do. Like, I don't need to suffer. Does that make sense? I'm happy to work. I'm happy to work hard. I'm happy to have many bad days doing something I believe in. And when I do that, I just find that the tools that are necessary are different from being in a life where I hate everything that I do, that I force myself to do. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I think that schools in the current state are outdated. Again, not all. I don't want to make a general, blanket statement. Could be that some are very good, but just generally speaking, and I have nieces and nephews, and I see what they're being taught. It seems outdated. Especially COVID probably really heightened how outdated it is. I think honestly, the best thing schools are for social interactions. They make you a social being. You create friends. You fail making friends, which helps you grow as well. And with all the ups and downs of being social throughout life up until you're 18, but as far as the curriculum and the things they teach you, honestly, if I had to guess off the top of my head, I would say probably 50% of it is it's useless. It's not stuff you're going to remember when you grow up. It's not stuff that's really setting you up for life. It's really just, it's useless. It's absolutely useless. And now we're seeing all these online schools that are popping up. I'm seeing like a lot of them. And I think those are just, although again, it nothing's perfect. 100%, it lacks something. And I think the social aspect is what it's lacking. But as far as teaching you things, I think they're 100% better than anything you have in just a regular school.
Yeah. I think for people, like, it seems like for us, this might offer a helpful alternative. I grew up with people who were just fine with the way the school system was. I think that that's the problem. There's like such neurodiversity in different learning styles and the way that people learn, and that their systems are set up to promote certain characteristics and ignore others, or try to de-emphasize other characteristics. So I don't know if it's an easy problem to solve. I think that the fact that there is so much online education becoming available, such high quality online education also, yep. I mean, some of the brightest minds there are, it's like, okay, I can pay $100 a year and, learn from whoever, you want to learn from Malcolm Gladwell, go ahead. I think that that's wonderful. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I mean, for me, I found that the most powerful way of learning is wanting to build things. That's it. Like, if I want to learn anything, I will acquire the tools and skills that I need to make something real. That to me has always felt like the best way to learn something. Yeah. So in some ways it's almost like an apprenticeship or something like that. And I feel like having more of an emphasis on that is great. Just like letting kids build things that they're curious about. Traditional schools do offer a situation in which you're exposed to things you may not be in the normal, if you didn't have school. Let's put it that way, right? Yeah. How many people are going to run into math or science or biology or physics in the real world? So there's a balance to be had there. I do like the fact that, you're forced to encounter things that you wouldn't normally if you just pursued your own passion. But then being stuck in something that has zero interest is also not ideal.
Yeah. It's, not every shoe fits every foot. Yes. We're all different, and we all have different interests. And granted, I'm not going to ask like a 7-year-old, hey, pick your curriculum. But at a certain age, I think I don't know if there's tests that we can do or something just so people don't get stuck in classes that are just useless to them and utilize their time in stuff that's more interesting and things that they can thrive in. Especially now with the internet, like you said, some of the greatest minds, they are available to us, some even for free, or for a for a very small amount of money. But also the possibility to make money has never been more accessible, right? Mm-hmm. You can have a 15-year-old that's a really good programmer and comes up with something, and he could be a millionaire by the time he's 18. Like, does he really need to go to college? He's already doing better than, someone 10 years after college, just financially speaking, right? And I'm not saying this is a standard, but these do happen. So it's a completely different paradigm shift that's happening over the past few years.
Yeah, it's education has become a new Wild West. There's so much more opportunity to learn than there has been before. And that's really exciting. And I do feel like a lot of the traditional problems that we've encountered can greatly be mitigated, at least by technology.
Yeah,
like this is what technology can help us do. It's like here, we can test people on all sorts of different dimensions, and we feel like these curriculums would be better. And obviously that's a slippery slope as well. But I'm excited to see what comes. I've definitely benefited even as an adult from what's happening with education now. I'm still taking courses all the time and things like, okay, I guess I'm going to learn about stoicism now. It's like, why not? Or I don't know, flamenco guitar, click, done, great. That's fun.
Yeah, we're forever students. I think that's the fun part. I'm the same. For me, it's almost a problem. Like I'm interested in too many things. Like I would need 3 lives in order to achieve half the stuff I'm interested in and I want to, learn and get better at. But it is what it is. Do you think and I'm using air quotes because I don't know if you can actually fully ever be, but are you cured of ADD in some sense or another?
I just don't think about it anymore, to be honest. I don't really let it define me, and I haven't for a very long time. I have worked my way into a position where I get to work on the things that I find to be meaningful. And sometimes that's really engaging. And sometimes there are days where I have to deal with shipping logistics all the time. It doesn't interfere in my life anymore. And sure, sometimes I'll space out during a conversation. There's still vestiges of my ADD in my behavior for sure. But I don't know if it was ever a problem to begin with, if that makes sense. I'm not, if you think about ADD, it's basically you're being measured against a norm, right? It doesn't make you better or worse. It's just you're more this and less that, right? And in my life, that has been of benefit to me. So I don't know if it needs to be cured.
Yeah.
I don't know if viewing it that way would be helpful. I have challenges for sure. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if that's because of ADD or whatnot as a person, but in general, I think that everybody does. And then curing is not really the goal. It's just becoming aware of the things that require more attention.
Yeah, that's why I was using air quotes for the curing.
Sure.
But I think you just have to not see things as a weakness and either see them as a strength or focus on something else that is a strength, right? If you're, I don't know, super tall person, you're like, oh, I stand out. I don't like standing out. I'm super tall. But you're like, all right, maybe try basketball, or maybe, I don't know, do something that, tall people have an advantage in. And it's the same with this. Like, okay, I'm not the greatest in school. I space out, but I have a very creative side. Let me utilize that aspect and focus more on that. So I think it's just, like you said, it's not a curing thing. It's being aware, and it's just channeling your energy into doing things that you know you could be better at rather than focusing on the negative.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think it's important to be aware of your challenges and the things that you could use a lot of help in, because that's part of the choices you make as well. But I think playing into fortunately, I like being creative and I can make money being creative. So I can lean into that strength. I'm sure there are people out there who happen to have challenges in things that they're specifically excited about or interested in as well. But in this case, that's not so. And I think it's really important to just, in general, I just think self-awareness is a skill that needs to be developed as part of your forever growth, if you will. Because you change, your circumstances change, and who you become with new circumstances changes as well. So I've noticed that now I have new weaknesses because my business has changed and like my team has grown. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, here's something that I could improve on. Is it worth that investment of time and effort? Yes or no? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it's the self-awareness that's really important, and to cultivate that awareness with curiosity and not with judgment. Like I think that has helped me tremendously as somebody who's so judging about all my shortcomings constantly. Why don't I get this? Why don't I understand this? Why am I the last in my class? And that wasn't helpful. It was just kind of a downward spiral.
Yeah.
When I started trying to approach these shortcomings, quote unquote, with curiosity, all of a sudden I'd be like, okay, what's one thing I could do to make this a little bit easier? Or what's one thing that I'm good at that I could focus on? And that helps me be a lot more productive.
Yeah, I think it was Muhammad Ali that said, if you're the same person that you are at 50 that you were at 20, you've wasted 30 years of your life. And it's true, we're a constant evolution. For me, like, this podcast has been extremely beneficial and helpful in many things. One is listen, because there's two things happening. Like, I have to listen to you and I have to be attentive to what you're saying, because I really want us to share a moment. And, I want to have the best conversation possible. But in my head, I'm thinking all these things at the same time, and I'm trying to not have dead space in the conversation. And in the beginning, I actually I had a little bit of a battle. I was like, oh no, and I would lose people, and it wasn't good. The first few podcasts I had sucked. They were really bad looking. I can't listen to them. It's so cringe. And but I learned. I got better. I got better at listening. Right before I wanted to talk more, because I was scared. Ooh, the dead space. It doesn't sound good. And now I'm calmer. I'm trying to be more attentive to what the guest is talking about, be present, be in the moment, and just let them talk as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely, it's a growth. It happens over time. It's not overnight.
Oh yeah. No, there are very few shortcuts that end up actually being shortcuts. One of my favorite lines is the long way is the short way. And the older I get, the more I realize it's mostly true.
It is.
It's like if you skip a couple steps to not have to learn something, that comes back.
Yeah, there's this idea all the time, and I see this in the news, the overnight success, right? Like, oh, this person built this company overnight, or they gained this massive following overnight, or whatever it is. Usually what they don't tell you is the 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 years of work they had to put in to get to that point. I was talking, mm-hmm. I had a guy on a couple of weeks ago, Arturo Elizondo, and he's the founder of Every Company. And they make egg alternatives. So plant-based, but they're a B2B company. So they sell to other manufacturers, and instead of eggs, it's their alternative. And he's been, recently they raised a lot of capital, and he was all over the news, touted as this and that, as overnight success, et cetera. He was like, I've been working on this for 8 years, blood, sweat, and tears, sleepless nights. This is anything but overnight success. So yeah, to your point.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, overnight success is just another term for like somebody you haven't heard of before. It's the same thing. It's like, of course you don't know who this person is. Why would you know the egg alternative person until all of a sudden he makes headlines? Sure.
Yeah.
And then you judge yourself by them.
Right? Exactly.
And
that's the problem. That's the problem. Right. So frustrating. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's real.
We're recording this in early January. This is the time where people are still sticking to their New Year's resolution because, it's 11 days. I would hope so. New gym memberships are coming out, and people are running and they're exercising and they're feeling good. But usually, and I'm just at fault for this, come February, March, maybe April, and you kind of forget and you slip into life. And are there ways to keep those goals in mind, the same goals that you had, December 30th? That way you don't forget it come June, July, August. Are there some good ways that people can, or tools that people can utilize in order to maintain that?
Sure. There's a lot to say about this topic, but
yeah, we have time.
I guess the short version is I don't make resolutions, because I think it's really important when we're trying to create change in our lives that we use the right tools. Now we have a distinction between tools. Like, what's the difference between resolutions and goals and intentions and plans and all these things? And for me, the way that I like to draw a distinction is that a resolution is a commitment to an outcome, right? That's my definition. It's a commitment to an outcome, which sounds perfectly reasonable. I will lose 10 pounds. I will launch that business. I will do all that stuff. But at the same time, if your friend came to you and told you that they could predict the future, you wouldn't think that's reasonable, right? Yeah. Why? Like, why can't we predict the future? Because we can't control it. And if a resolution is a commitment to an outcome, it's a commitment to a future. It's a commitment to something you have no control over whatsoever. And I feel like a lot of resolutions fall through. It's because you're committing to something you can't control. I'm going to go to the gym every day. Okay, the gym's shut because the pipes have leaked. Now what? Right? It's like, oh, okay, I'll start next week. It's like, no, you won't. Chances are you won't do that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's really important that we set a target of some kind, right? To have something. And that's what goals are for me, right? Goals, in my language, are a definition of an outcome, right? They define an outcome. Like, this is to lose 10 pounds, to start a business. That's really important to really kind of hone in what it is that you want to do. And then how do you get to the goal, right? You need some kind of process, right? That's what a plan is for. The plan is your strategy. It's the definition of a process. And a process is something you can control. You can get up every morning, you can walk to the gym, like those kind of things. And I think when we have these definitions, it's really important. But then if you're anything like me, you've accomplished goals in the past. I'm sure you've accomplished at least a couple in your time. And what happens? What happens when you accomplish your goal? In my experience, not much, right? You accomplish the goal, you make this much money, you get the raise, you get this guest, you write the book. What happens? Not much. Right? It's like, if anything, it often feels bad because your goal often gives you an identity, right? You're the person who goes to the gym. You're the person who's writing this book. You're the person doing that thing. And then as soon as you accomplish your goal's over, right? So your identity kind of dies in that sense. So for me, what I found really powerful after having set and accomplished some really massive, quote unquote, impressive goals, is like I always felt empty because it was the end of something. It was never the beginning. And like, what's the only way to solve that? To plug that hole inside, set another goal, run another race, do it over and over again. It's like constantly running towards ego death. That's not a way to be alive, right? That's not helpful. So for me, all of a sudden, I'm like, why am I setting these goals in general? What's the purpose of these things? And that's really what has brought me to intentions, right? That's like the whole thing about bullet journal is like living an intentional life. And an intention for me is aligning your values with your actions, essentially. So for me, my goals all have to serve my values and my intentions, right? It's like, I want to be a person who can help as many people as possible. I will be forgiving with myself. I will be of service to my community. These are never ending intentions. And so for me, what has been helpful in really making meaningful progress is setting goals that are in service of my values and my intentions. So, because it's never ending. The goals are there for me to experience what it's like to be a certain way, if that makes sense. To be a person who feels confident, to be a person who can help other people, to be a good leader or, a better teacher, whatever it is. And once I started seeing how those pieces fit together, resolutions just didn't make a lot of sense, because what is an intention? It's a commitment to a process, right? That's what it is. You're going to be a certain way, and that can happen in any moment, right? When you do the thing, when you live up to your intention, you're being intentional. And when you're not, you're not. And then you have the next moment, and then you have the next moment, and your goals and your plans help you experience that reality. They allow you to embody your values.
I feel this is a good stop to the podcast. I don't think we're going to get any better. That was awesome. Especially as someone who's used to making too many resolutions. I would try to fit all my lifetime resolutions into 1 year. And I would just write 30 resolutions for the year. And now, I'm definitely going to try to do what you said. It's much better. But even this year, my process has just been cut down, just focus on essentials. What can I really achieve this year? Is that realistic? So instead of 30, just do 6 and really focus on those 5 or 6 things. And don't, what's the word? Don't lose the focus that you need to have on those 5, 6 things by thinking of those other 20 the year prior. So yeah, that's kind of what I did this year. And we'll see. We're 11 days in. It's been going good so far. Ryder, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This was a lot of fun, man.
Thanks for having me. Yes, it was.
Where are the best places for the listeners to find you online?
bulletjournal.com. There's everything you need to find.
You're not too active on social, right?
Through my brand, sure. Through Bullet Journal, I don't post a lot personally, but we post a fair amount through Bullet Journal accounts.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of videos. Definitely, guys, go check that out. Man, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Take care.